Greetings, members one and all of the Salivation Nation, the great U.S. Mint silver coin scheme. Let's explore! Yes, you're probably wondering what kind of scheme are we talking about? Is some sort of fraud committed to us by the United States Mint? Well, not really, but there is something they did do to try to really kind of deceive us in some ways to prevent us from hoarding silver coins back in 1964, 65, and 1966. This is from an article from CoinWeek.com. Tom DeLaury makes us aware of some interesting history behind the United States Mint, and some of us may have known that the Mint continued to pump 1964 dated silver dimes, quarters, and half dollars into circulation through 1965, but maybe you didn't know that they did it into 1966. The reasons for doing that was quite reasonable at the time. Most collectors do not know is that the second half of 1967, the Mint secretly began clawing back some of that silver, melting down dimes and quarters and refining it back into 999 fine bars that could be sold at a higher price than the face value on the coins so destroyed. So they were kind of doing what the Mint has told us not to do with pre-1982 cents now. The first good reason to issue the coins was to discourage the hoarding of rolls and bags of brilliant uncirculated modern coins. In the post-World War II era, there were several years where the total annual mintage of a given date and mint mark combination was relatively low across various denominations. This reflected the fact that the Federal Reserve system routinely recycled older coins back into circulation, minus worn out or damaged pieces condemned as uncurrent, and only ordered new coins from the Mint when the current demand exceeded the recycled supply. One of the most famous examples of a low mintage modern coin is a 1950D Jefferson nickel, with only 2,630,030 made, and easily half of those snapped up by speculators. By the end of the decade, original $2 rolls were selling for around 10 times that much. In 1960, the Philadelphia Mint struck only 2,075,000 cents with a small date style in early January before switching production over to foreign coins for the next few months. By the time the Mint resumed domestic production in late March, the date style on the cent had changed to a large format, and rolls of small date cents skyrocketed. People began hoarding anything BU in the hope that lightning would strike a third time. Other factors influenced U.S. monetary policy surge in the use of vending machines so that the net demand for coinage always exceeded the recycled supply. And the introduction of the wildly popular Kennedy half dollar in 1964. And boy, there were a lot of those half dollars. In fact, that's why you see here on this array a lot of brilliant uncirculated versions of both the Kennedy half dollar, the Washington quarter, and the Roosevelt dime can be had for very little above spot price. One of the top factors in the Treasury Department, a major player in the bullion market for over a century, faced an exorbitant rise in the market price of silver that threatened to make silver coins worth more as a bullion than their face value. And that's what we're seeing with the Lincoln cent these days. Even with the copper-coated zinc, I think it's still worth more than 1 cent. For years, it protected the silver coinage supply from being melted by selling virtually unlimited supplies of pure silver at $1.29 an ounce, the level at which the silver in a silver dollar was worth $1. But it knew that if it kept on doing this, that it would eventually run out of silver. The Treasury had seen 3 previous periods when the precious metal coins were hoarded or melted for the metallic content. Gold in 1834, silver in 1857, and both during the Civil War. And it needed to keep an adequate supply of silver coins in temporary circulation while it ginned up permanent replacement for them. In fact, you may remember the 3-cent nickel being made out of nickel. The search took time, however, and while it was taking place, the mint had to keep providing coins to the banking and vending machine industries. So in late 1964, the Treasury announced that they would be freezing the date on coins of all denominations at 1964 until further notice. Boy, can you imagine finding a 1965 silver quarter, dime, or half dollar? That would have been cool. But in the end, the immediate needs of the vending machine won over the exotic materials that might work better for years down the road. And the sandwich materials authorized by the Coin and Jack in 1965 included 2 copper-nickel outer layers clad in a pure copper core for the dime and quarter. And that certainly, and 2 80% silver, 20% copper outer layers clad upon a 20.9% silver, 79% copper core for the half dollar. The total coin averaging 40% silver. So that's the new materials for these compositions for the vending machines. By the way, in 1964 quarter, there's 1,264,526,113 coins struck for the 1964 quarter. In 1965, there are 1,819,717,540 coins struck. The new coins were approximately the same thickness as their 90% silver predecessors, but because copper and nickel are less dense than 900 fine silver, they weigh a bit less. This weight difference soon became extremely important. The mints began striking 1965 dated CN-clad quarters on August 23, 1965, while continuing to strike 1964 dated 900 fine quarters until January of 1966. The last silver quarters were struck at the San Francisco Assay Office, the former San Francisco Mint, which had closed in 1955 due to then lack of demand for coinage, which had been reopened in the early 1960s to help fight the coin shortage. Coins made there before 1968 were struck without mint marks to discourage hoarding. Now you're seeing an increase in mint marks, and we're finding it more because we want people to collect again. Interesting. After a large quantity of clad quarters had been stockpiled, open to discourage hoarding, they were released into circulation in November of 1965. The production of CN clad dimes began a few months after the quarters, but they were not released until January of 1966, probably to avoid interfering with the 1965 Christmas shopping season. In those days, when credit cards were not as common as they are today, the mint typically saw an increased demand for coins from Thanksgiving until the new year. The striking of 900 fine dimes at Denver ended in early 1966. The 1965 cent and nickel began production on December 29, 1965, and the 1965 half on December 30th. But the half dollar does not figure into the silver withdrawal story. Huge quantities of 1965 dated dimes and quarters were struck through the end of July 1966. Wow. You want to talk about a scheme or a swindle? Look at that. You don't know what year these things were minted, even though the date shows one thing. Kind of reminds you of the 1804 silver dollar that was struck in the 1830s and sent to King Farouk. Normal dating resumed in 1967, but the mints continued to produce large quantities of clad dimes and quarters in that year. The reason for this huge mintage was that the Treasury departments wanted to start clawing some of the silver coins back. So there you go. That's the way to do it. They want to get those coins back out of circulation. Indeed. Crazy to think about, for sure. Because it knew ordinary citizens were doing just that. They were starting to take them out by 1967, realizing the value of silver. Take, for instance, the parents of somebody that during that time, all 4 of them born around 1920, They were old enough to be fully aware of how hard life was during the Great Depression. When the clad quarters and dimes appeared, both families began hoarding the older 900 fine silver dimes, quarters, and halves. Millions of other Depression babies did the same. Yes, indeed. As a budding numismatist, people out there were realizing that these silver coins had some value, for sure. Canadian silver coins common in Detroit, except for the half dollars, were rolled and marked separately. And yes, indeed. So very fascinating indeed how this stuff has come to be, and how far into the late 60s the 64 dimes, quarters, and nickels were minted. Just something else to behold out there. All of this going on. And, and they did it to try to keep people from hoarding it. That's really the bottom line for all this. Crazy indeed. So this continued for quite some time, and it's amazing how they tried to do whatever they could to try to stop this hoarding. But nonetheless, it kept going. But there he is. Very interesting story indeed. And so what do you think? And I think this is quite a revealing story. And I think that with some of the hoarding that's been going on and some of the recirculation of some of these silver coins, when people realize that, hey, the silver was starting to either go up and down with the markets and being seen as an industrial metal as well, and when silver didn't quite perform as well, I think after 1980, a lot of this stuff came back in, as well as after 2011, when the prices spiked up and then kind of came back down pretty severely. So a lot of this stuff hit into the marketplace there. Fascinating indeed. Well, post your thoughts below. I thought this was quite fascinating story here, because I knew that some of these coins were minted into 1965, but I didn't think it was go far into 1966, and what the mint had done after that was quite revealing indeed. So there you have it, the swindle, the scheme that the U.S. Mint had perpetuated upon all of us here during that time. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.